Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast. I am Jason Haas, as always. I am super excited for my guest today. It'll be Dave McIntyre, who is the wine columnist for the Washington Post, among many other talents. But as we wait for people to join, as I always do, I'm going to give you a little tour of what things look like out in the vineyard right now. We've had really our first truly kind of summery weather over the last week. The cover crops are starting to go to flower and go to seed. A couple pictures of what that looks like out there. Check out, this is those of you who saw the little tour I gave in the cover crops a couple of weeks ago, this is that same block, which we've now mowed and are getting ready to bale. So this is something we're going to store this cover crop and feed it to the animals in the times of year when they can't be out in the vineyard. Another picture that shows that, I actually picked up a handful of that. That's essentially hay, but it's not just grasses. It's all the other great stuff that's in there. So that's one look at the vineyard. Another look out there. This is a picture of our Muscardin block. You can see still big cover crops. You've got new growth on the vines. The vines look super healthy, which is exciting. Another look, again, deeper in that cover crop where it's just like flowers everywhere, bees everywhere. Super beautiful time of year. One or two more pictures of what things look like out there. You can see that we're getting new growth, even in late grapes like Mourvedre. This is the last to sprout and last to grow, and that's already, we've got shoots that are like 4 to 6 inches long. There's a picture that I got of the border between a Mourvedre block and a Grenache block. It doesn't show up super well in this picture, but it's Mourvedre on the right, Grenache on the left. You can see that the Grenache is bushier than the Mourvedre. That's partly because Grenache is just bushy. It's a super vigorous vine, but it's also because it sprouted like 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And on that Grenache, we've got baby grapes. Well, not really. We've got flower clusters, at least. We don't have any bloom yet, but that's probably coming in the next couple of weeks. So super hopeful time of year, always in the vineyard. Starting to get warm. We hit 90 for the first time this weekend. Supposed to be low 90s this week. It'll cool back down again, but it's coming. We know summer's coming. Two more photos of the vineyard. This is a block, kind of the border between spring and summer. You can see on the right a Tannat block where we've already turned the cover crop under. And on the left you can see the tall grass from that Syrah block which we mowed. And then one picture of some fruit trees. We've got, I mean, everything's flowering. So we've got, this is an apple tree that's flowering. All of the interplanted stuff is beautiful. In the cellar, we've been working on blending. Those of you who read my blog this week will see there's some of the components that we worked with. We turned 66 different red lots into 15 different wines. And it was incredibly reassuring. Everybody worries. You don't know for sure until you actually taste the vintage whether it's going to be as good as you hope it was at harvest time. I think 2020 is going to be even better than we hoped. I think it's going to take its place among the best vintages that we've seen in the last 2 decades. So I loved it. I wasn't sure that I would. It was not a slam dunk. It was not an easy year last year, but the wines are lush and deep and generous and really beautiful. Okay. I am done sharing pictures. It's 12:04. I'm going to ask Dave to join. So add him to the invitation. Okay. Waiting for him to connect. So, Dave, hopefully you just saw that join request. Couple other things to note. Hey.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Dave?
All right, thanks. Let me
worked.
Adjust the light here. Yeah, it worked. You can teach this old dog some new tricks.
Excellent. Cool. How are things in DC?
Well, it's DC. It's crazy as always, but of course it's a lot calmer now than it was just a few months ago.
I think that's true with life in general. I feel like the news cycle has gone back to being maybe not at a normal pace, but at least not the kind of hyper accelerated pace that we saw over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that constant anxiety of the last 4 years of every time my phone buzzed with a news alert, just wondering what the heck was going on now. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Now it's usually just a spam call or somebody trying to sell me steaks.
Super cool. Okay, so usually the way that I start with people is I ask them to kind of talk about their journey into wine. I mean, you've been writing about wine for, I mean, what, 20, almost 25 years now?
Just about, yeah.
How did that start? How did you start getting into wine?
Well, it goes back to visiting wineries in California, actually. Early on in our marriage, my wife and I were visiting friends in the Bay Area, and we spent a day up in Napa. And we just thought, this is cool. This is really fun. And we decided that it might be worth upgrading our Kroger Cost Cutter jug wines to something a little more, balanced, shall we say. And when we came home, we started going to wine stores in DC on Saturdays and learning, tasting, talking to people. And since we had started by visiting wineries, we did that back here too. And we visited wineries in Virginia and Maryland, which didn't have very much at the time, but it was right at the beginning of a very dramatic growth in the wine industries of both those states. So we had good timing, and we got to meet some fascinating people.
But there's still a big leap between like going to visit wineries and falling in love with wine and actually writing about that experience. How did that happen?
Well, I was working as a journalist at the time, and writing about wine became a way to learn about it. So I started just pitching articles and got a few published in food before I actually got some in wine. But of course, about this time, websites are developing and they need content. So that proved to be a good avenue for me to get some articles published.
And I think I read that the DM Wine Line started as an email newsletter back in 99?
98, 99, yeah. And I had been writing for a website called Sidewalk DC at the time. It was published by Microsoft.
Yeah, I remember
it. Bill Gates lost interest in it after 2 years because he couldn't figure out how to make money. Nobody had invented banner ads then. So that folded. I didn't have a gig. So I just said, well, okay. I used my last column to say, send me your email address if you'd like to hear from me. And I got maybe 20 people who sent me theirs. And I just started doing an email newsletter every 2 to 4 weeks. And it was a lot of fun. I kept that up for a while and eventually migrated it over to TypePad and then WordPress. And I haven't really done much lately on it because I've been busy with the full-time writing with the Post. And I, like Bill Gates, I haven't figured out how to make money off the blog. So, but somebody years later said, well, you were one of the first bloggers, because nobody called it a blog then.
Right.
So I don't know that I deserve necessarily credit for that. But yeah, I'm old enough to have been there near the beginning.
So what's it like writing a regular column for a newspaper? I mean, there's not that many newspapers that still have regular wine columns. It's just a handful at this point. How do you think about the generation of story ideas? And because it becomes a real driver. You have to come up with new content again and again and again.
Yes. And of course, since I've been doing the Post column now for 12 and a half years, I can go back and mine some of the subjects at least and update the content. But you're right. It is kind of sometimes hard to think about. And I have to try to not be too, shall we say, wine geeky about it, because I'm writing for a broad consumer audience. And to find things that are interesting to me that I think I can make interesting to readers. It's not necessarily, this winery uses American oak and discuss the differences of American and French oak or something like that, which might, make a very interesting piece on a blog or in a wine magazine. It is challenging. I do a lot of what I call Wine 101, which is just explaining the basics, which to you and me, is second nature because we live wine so much. But it's fun. It is a challenge, but it's fun.
It's interesting that you mentioned that kind of wine 101 idea, because I've been realizing as you know, and as most people who will be watching this knows, I mean, we also have a blog at Tablas Creek, and I write content for that just about every week. But I've been realizing that there is a huge amount of value in making sure that people understand the real fundamentals of wine, and why you might make a choice to store it in a certain way, or why you might make the choice to make it in a certain way, or why you might make a choice to drink it at a certain temperature, or like all of these things that, like, I think it's easy if you get yourself immersed in wine to forget that people find wine challenging and difficult and intimidating. And for those of us in the business, the job of making it less intimidating and helping people wrap their heads around the questions is a super worthwhile one.
Yes, definitely. And there are times, sometimes it's, I gotta try to make the subject seem fresh again, even though it might be, I've written about it 3 years ago or 8 years ago or something like that. Because I gotta remind myself that those columns were long ago recycled or put at the bottom of a bird cage or something, and they exist online. I can find them, most of them, but they're not in the minds of the readers. So yes, going over the basics definitely helps.
And you also have kind of a front row seat for the development of what's become a super vibrant wine community, and I mean, starting in Virginia, but also in Maryland, and just kind of that mid-Atlantic wine. What's it been like to kind of see that rise from almost the beginning?
It's been exhilarating, really. It's great. And one of the things I did actually early on with the Post gig, I started with the Post in 1998, and that fall, a friend of mine, Jeff Siegel, who you might know, he blogs as the Wine Curmudgeon out of Dallas. He and I were talking about the lack of coverage in newspapers, the wine stream media, as we call it, about local wines. Everything was California, Oregon, Washington. And so we started Local Wine Week, and we urged the wine writers who were still writing at the time and bloggers to write about their local wines the 1 week in October. And that became an organization we called Drink Local Wine, which for 5 or 6 years had conferences in various states for writers and bloggers to introduce them to the wines that were coming up all around us. And I used to call it, wines from around here, wherever here happens to be. And it was very exciting. I got my introduction to Missouri wines through that, Texas and Michigan, not Michigan, we didn't do Michigan. I went to Michigan later, but we did, obviously, Maryland and Virginia as well.
Yeah. And so what
Colorado,
do you, I mean, for those of us who are out here on the West Coast, we don't get to see wines from Virginia and Maryland very often. What are for you the most exciting things that you are seeing in that community?
Well, there are two things. One, I would say, first of all, on the top level of wineries, like in Virginia, you have Barbersville, Linden, RDV, and a few others that you may have heard of. It's confidence and sophistication. These are really well-made, world-class wines. On another level, you have experimentation. You've got younger winemakers who are saying, rules? We don't have no rules. And they're making Pétillant Naturel, the current fad, and now we're getting piquettes, things like that.
Yeah.
But we're also getting weird, I shouldn't say weird, but unusual and delicious grape blends that you don't really see anywhere else. Petit Manseng, for instance, among whites, started in Virginia because they were desperate for any variety with thick skins and loose clusters that wouldn't rot in the humidity. So, and then they found that, wait a minute, this makes really great wine. It's a high acid, high sugar wine. So they spent years trying to figure out, well, is it a dessert wine? Can we do it dry? Or how do we do this? And it's fun because sometimes you don't really know what you're going to get when you try a winery's Petit Manseng. They're kind of focusing in on a drier style now, which is good to see too. But when you get one of that's done late harvest or something like that, it's just stunning.
It is a bonkers grape. Um, I don't know if I can't remember when you were out here. I can't remember if I showed you our Petit Manseng, but it's a grape that we literally cannot make dry and drinkable because it's so high sugar and so high acid that if you pick it at a sugar level that'll actually ferment dry, the acids are searing. And if you so you end up with something that's either very alcoholic or still sweet and very acidic. So we've ended up having to make it into this kind of off dry, or choosing to make it into this off dry. It would work well as a sweet wine also. But that's, again, a reflection of what we have in Paso Robles, where it's so dry and there's so much sun and the nights are so cold that it emphasizes both the high sugar and the high acid character. So out here, you can only make it as a sweet wine or a semi-sweet wine. But I've loved several of the dry Petit Mansengs that I have gotten to try from Virginia, because it does have so much vibrancy and so much electricity and this beautiful fruit, beautiful kind of green fruit. And yet it's still got weight, it's got texture. It's a cool thing. It feels like a grape that really is not meant to be grown in Paso Robles, but is an amazing thing in the right place.
And there are some winemakers who have blended it with Viognier, which is, of course, a low-acid wine. So they kind of balance each other out. And that's nice. Just a little bit of Petit Manseng can make the Viognier even more aromatic and give it a little bite, or, even as much as a third, or I forget some of the proportions now. But, it can make some very interesting wines.
Super cool. So are there if there were a couple of wines that you thought that people should search out to wrap their heads around what's going on, particularly in Virginia, where would you tell people to start?
Well, come here. That would be the best recommendation, and explore them in person. In Virginia, there are two regions that are the main wine regions. That's Loudoun County, which is near Washington. If you land at Dulles Airport, you can be at a winery in 10 minutes after leaving the airport property. The other is Charlottesville, in the Monticello Wine Trail area. And there are some wineries scattered in between, too, that are doing some great stuff. And, anybody who comes can write to me. I'll certainly give them some recommendations. But the types of wines to look for would be specifically among whites, the Petit Manseng and Viognier. We don't really do Riesling very well in the Mid-Atlantic. Among reds are actually the stars. Cab Franc is a big one, but the Bordeaux style blends, a number of wineries make Tannat, and they put those Tannat in a Bordeaux blend. That's another thing that you don't really see anywhere else, maybe, except Uruguay. And they're really they're gaining confidence. I say they have a lot of confidence now, and that's pretty cool. And there are a few stunning Chardonnays, and Sauvignon Blanc and Albarino, actually, among the whites, are doing pretty well in Virginia and Maryland. In Maryland, the wineries are more spread out and less numerous than in Virginia. But around Frederick to Baltimore, and even some along the Chesapeake Bay, are making some really nice wines. We're seeing some hybrids, too. Some really nice wines from Chambourcin and Chardonnay and other hybrids.
Awesome.
Which is way the local wines were when I started following them, and everybody was like, "We gotta crack vinifera," and now they're like, "Hybrids! We don't have to spray as much. It's great." So everything old is new again, I guess.
I think that's a sign of the maturation of the American wine market, that it's not quite as dominated by like those big 6 grape varieties, the Cab, Merlot, Pinot, Zinfandel, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, as it was even 15 years ago. There's room for more experimentation, and it's such a larger part of American wine culture, going out and actually visiting wineries where people are expecting to get exposed to stuff that they maybe haven't even heard of up till then.
Yeah. So it's an adventure. You do need an open mind. I still encounter people in person and in comments on my articles on the Post website that say, "Oh, I had a Virginia wine once and it was awful. I'll never try it again." And I'm like, go. That's exactly the wrong attitude to have.
I had a hamburger once and that wasn't good. Therefore, I'm never going to have another one.
Well, they're being banned now anyway.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how you feel like the pandemic has impacted kind of your view on wine and your writing about wine. I know you wrote an article recently that talked about kind of the changes that you think are going to come out of the pandemic for wineries and wine regions. You and I talked a little bit before that. But has your approach to what you choose to write about or how you choose to write about it been impacted during COVID?
Well, there's been a lot of newsy angles to write about over the past year. I mean, obviously the sudden shift of channels when the restaurant market just dried up like that, and everybody started ordering everything from home, and people who weren't used to buying wine online became used to buying it online. So the growth of that channel, the way it affected wineries that had to suddenly, figure out how to sell the wines that they were allocating only to restaurants. And I think, wineries now, I just saw a news item today about two companies forming an alliance to help wineries tackle the online market. And I think that would be really good, because wineries that weren't operating online 14 months ago probably had a much harder time adapting to the shutdowns than the ones who were already established. And so I think that development was very interesting. And of course, we also had the Board of Master Sommeliers, the diversity arguments, and efforts in that. And so there's actually been a lot to write about.
Yeah, you're right. I'd forgotten all about that. There was. I mean, not outside of pandemic, this has been a big news year for American wine also.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you think of, if I think back to my own mindset last March, where I was looking at an indefinite closure of our tasting room, and we knew that restaurants were going to be closed, and really nobody knew what was going to come next. I was super worried. I didn't know what we were going to see, and it turned out that we were able to build so much business from people who wanted to call us up and order online, that we were able to make up for the sales that we lost from the other channels that were closed. And I feel like wineries were maybe a little better positioned than some small businesses and small retailers to figure out that shipping and e-commerce piece, because we've sort of had to do it already. We've had to figure out how to navigate that network of permits and shipping and delivery and compliance and tracking and all of that, because it's alcohol and you can't just wing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe the sector of the wine trade that was perhaps hardest hit would be small importers. I think because the supply chain woes, losing the restaurants, the supply chain woes, and getting a container to bring wine over from Europe or up from South America, it's been tough on a lot of them, and I know they've been struggling. So, but it's good to see that most of the ones I'm dealing with, knock on wood, are pulling through.
Yeah. Now it feels like anybody who made it this far is like, I mean, it's looking pretty good. I mean, with restaurants reopening, with everybody kind of ready to get out, and also the expertise that I feel like we've all built in these new ways of connecting with people and new ways of getting our wine to the end customer. Like I'm feeling pretty optimistic about 2021.
Yeah, good. I am too.
Good. So what do you feel like are the interesting trends in American wine in general? We've talked a lot about Virginia and Maryland, but what are the things that you see are the most interesting, maybe right now, but maybe not even quite yet right now, but the things that you feel like are coming that are worth people paying attention to?
Well, one of the things I've noticed, and I'll maybe reserve judgment on whether, sorry, this thing's falling out of my ear, on whether it's a positive development or not. But it seems to me that wines, a lot of wines that I've been tasting, which are mostly samples given to me by local distributors, are noticeably sweeter. And I've tasted some, like a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that was kind of like Sprite, reminded me of Sprite. And there are some that are intentionally this way. They're made in a like half fermented, almost like the piquette that we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Half fermented, very sweet style, aimed for a casual drinker, a younger drinker who's not interested in a trophy wine called Cabernet at 15% alcohol. And I think that's part of a commercial trend and going towards casual, lighter wines, lower in alcohol. Vino Verde would be well positioned for this. It's not anything new. It's not trendy, or it's a little bit trendy perhaps because of that. But I think maybe more people are making wines in that style a little bit. I think the natural wine movement has guided the discussion towards lower alcohol and lower sulfite. I'm seeing more wines that are, saying no sulfites added on the labels. And I think that's great. It takes a little more effort by the winemakers. And I think it's great that they're trying it. They're being responsive to their market that way. And the wines I've had are quite good. If you don't add sulfites, it's going to go wrong in the bottle. Well, if it goes wrong, it's going to go wrong in the bottle unless you do the right things in the winery. So it's taking a little bit more on yourself as a winemaker to say, I'm going to do something without sulfites. And that's kind of a leap of courage, I think, for some who were brought up knowing that, just that little squirt in the bottle will save it from going bad.
Right.
But I see that happen. I see more wines like that, and I think that's positive. I think it's interesting. And of course, our discussions about eco-friendly viticulture and your regenerative certification, which I wrote about earlier this year, I think, and that's fascinating. And climate change is another big subject that we're going to be talking about for years.
Yeah, I did a guest lecture at a wine business class in Cal Poly, and one of the questions that I got from the students is like, how much time do you spend thinking about climate change and what that's going to do to your vineyard and your community and your business? And my response was like, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. It's not something which is necessarily going to have an impact in the next year or 2 or 3, but in the next 25 years, it'll have a big impact. And who knows? I don't think any of us could have predicted the fires that we saw last year. That's a climate change impact that can happen like instantly. All of a sudden, you're fine, you're on fire. I think that is going to be something that is going to be inescapable. The discussion as to how you're dealing with it is going to be inescapable certainly within 20 years, maybe sooner.
Yeah, I think so. And, I keep thinking of the old song, Little Old Wine Drinker Me, that starts, I'm praying for rain in California so the grapes will grow and they can make some more wine. So we've got a rainy day here today. I wish I could send you some.
Yeah, I'm honestly not expecting any rain until November. We're really at the point where a rainstorm would be surprising. And we did get a summer rainstorm last year. We got a random little burst of tropical moisture that came wandering up the California coast in August, which it gave us 0.2 of an inch of rain and started most of the fires with those thunderstorms up and down California. So I'll forego that 0.2 of an inch of rain if it also means that the lightning strikes don't come.
There you go.
And it's really not until fall. It's not until fall that we get a real legitimate chance of having a jet stream brought storm system, which is what we want. Cool. Well, I can't believe that it has already been a half an hour. This flew by. I have several other things that I would want to ask you, but I do think that it's important that we keep these to a reasonable amount of time. So, but I do want you to let everybody know if they want to read your column, they want to follow your writing. What's the best way for watchers, listeners to do that?
Well, the best way would be to become a digital subscriber of the Washington Post.
Support journalism.
Support journalism. The Post has done really well with their subscribership over, because everybody wanted to know what those buzzes were meaning on their phone for 4 years. But it is a paywall now. So it's WashingtonPost.com/food is the food section. My columns go online at noon on Friday, and they're in print the following Wednesday. There is another way. I do have a website. It's authory.com, authory, AUTHORY.com/Dave McIntyre. And that collects my columns and puts them there. So you can read them without the paywall that way. And you can go back and read old ones easier.
Yeah, no, I know your columns are always, they're must-read things for me every week because you not only find interesting things to write about, but you approach them from a perspective that I always find super thoughtful and super insightful.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say.
I also want to encourage people to follow you on Twitter. I know Twitter is one of my favorite venues for wine conversation, and I know I always learn stuff from you. So, what's your Twitter handle?
DM Wine. So my initials, Wine. Yeah. Boring, but easy to remember.
So same as on Instagram.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
And you're reminding me to do more on both. So.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you again, Dave. I really appreciate you taking a half an hour out of your Wednesday to check in. And everybody who's watched, please do subscribe to the Post. There's lots of amazing stuff there in addition to Dave's column. But that's I think worth it in and of itself. So again, thank you, Dave, for joining me, and everybody else who joined today. Thanks. I'll see you in 2 more weeks. My next guest is writer Stacy Briscoe, who's based up in Sonoma. So we'll be sharing more information about that. Meanwhile, thank you for being here today.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, Dave.
Bye.